Welcome to Goldphish, where we explore the future of cybersecurity and learning. I'm Dan Thornton, and today we're joined by Ginger Bell from Go2Training. Ginger Bell is the president of Go2Training, a company specializing in online regulatory compliance training. Go2Training offers courses in industries like food and alcohol, healthcare, OSHA, and real estate. Hi, Ginger. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, Dan. I'm excited to be here.
Cool. So let's jump straight in. Can you briefly share your journey into workplace education and what has brought you to where we are today with Go2Training?
Yeah, so my background has always been around education. Started a lot of my education in corporate, creating online learning, different, opportunities for sales learning, and did an opportunity I had with Dale Carnegie training, which is more live training. And for the past 20 years, I've been working in the US market and training for the mortgage and real estate industries. And so lots of compliance, lots of regulations, just as you know, with what you're doing at Goldfish. And so putting all of those pieces together as far as training can be very daunting. And especially when you have new regulations that are coming out where you need to train not only a workforce, but customers as well. And so that's been my focus for the past 20 years.
Interesting. What inspired you to first start the company?
It's always a great question. So started the company out of really needs for compliance training and being able to take for organizations what they had for their programs and turn it into continuing education for their clients to be able to help educate them on different programs. We have a lot of regulatory compliance regarding continuing education, especially in the mortgage and real estate space. And so there was a need for that. Initially, we started creating training, and it was interesting, Dan, as we were going down the path of doing education. Some of it was live, some of it was online. But what we found is a lot of professionals had to track their education and submit it to the states for record. And 20 years ago, we didn't have what we have today. And so I honestly would get calls from people throughout the month saying, "Hey, do you have my certificate? I need to turn that in order to get my license renewal." And so what we created was actually a tracking system to be able to have the providers track what they were doing, to easily keep track of those certificates, and have the students be able to go in and download certificates and submit them. And what ended up happening is we created an entire tracking system. And from that, we had states that were using it to be able to track the education of their licensees. And we had some regulatory changes in 2008 that made it a national standard. And so we saw a lot of changes in the state with that. And so that's how we started the company. It's been constantly changing, constantly evolving, depending on what's happening as far as regulations, what's happening with technology, being able to adapt. Now, so much of the micro learning is important. And so how do you do that? And you're in the compliance space, so you know how important that tracking is and that regulatory side of it. But there's the other element of learning that companies are tasked with, is combining that balance of what is required and then what's going to help to take their team to the next level. So that leveling up training, and how can you put that into one ecosystem and what that looks like. So that's a lot of what we do. And then there's the other side of it that a lot of companies miss, and that's the education that goes in for their customers. So whether it's onboarding, whether it's, client retention, outreach, all of those things, there's all opportunities to provide that educational element.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you touched on the compliance bit and finding that balance, because whether it's health and safety, whether it's sales training, whether it's cybersecurity, like we do, you're trying to create content where it actually educates and it actually changes behavior.
Yeah.
You've got learning professionals who are trying to create the best content out there, that it actually engages with the learners and they actually pay attention, and they actually start changing how they behave or how they sell or how they pitch or how they do their job because of the training that they've done. And then you've got others in the industry who are just like, no, this is a tick box exercise. We just,
Exactly.
just give the bare basics, and it's finding that balance for sure. So it's a tough one. You spoke, Ginger, about large changes that you've seen over time. What would you say is the most significant change in corporate training that you've witnessed over your career?
Well, I think when we went into really that online learning space where companies were, designing what their learning management system looked like, what elements would go into that. And again, that balance of what's required, check that box, especially in compliance, because you get the rolling of the eyes. It's like, I have to click the button. So incorporating ways to make it impactful, to make it, like you say, they are able to walk away from something. We saw a lot of changes. I did a lot through probably 2012 to 2015 and really working with online learning management systems to gamify. That was the buzzword at the time, was gamification. I actually worked with a company in Palo Alto, and we designed an entire LMS that had all of these gaming elements and things to it. And that was very interesting. I think through that, we found that that wasn't necessarily what users were looking for. So I think right now we're sitting at one of the biggest changes that we'll see in our space, and that is through AI. And that part is very exciting. Several years ago, I started looking at, okay, using the avatars and the AI avatars, and they were never there. They were horrible, and we never implemented that. We still relied on your standard forum as far as creating your education, especially online. But now we're starting to see advancements to where, we're looking at some of these AI avatars. I looked at one for a company a couple weeks ago, and it was really good. And so, a lot of what we're seeing right now is not just, okay, I'm going to watch this training, but how can the training be part of their day-to-day activity? And what that looks like. And so having an impact on not just you're going to sit and watch this, or you're going to go to a workshop or whatever it is, but it actually becomes a part of their workflow and they can learn as they're doing their work. So I think honestly, we're sitting at one of the biggest changes and opportunities right now with everything that's happening with AI.
It is exciting times to be involved in, I think, any tech industry right now, and seeing how AI is impacting it, how companies are really racing to adopt and keep up and figure out how they're going to remain relevant with AI, and figure out how they're going to use it to their advantage and not get left behind is an exciting thing I think a lot
Mhm.
of companies are looking at and embracing. Where do you see AI having the biggest impact over the next 12 months in the learning space?
I think AI will have the biggest impact on our small to mid-sized companies to be able to embrace and have the learning that they may have wanted but couldn't afford. And I think it'll streamline a lot of processes. For those companies that make it a part of their structure, I think they will find it easier for onboarding. I think they'll find it easier for training their customers. I think that the efficiencies will be so big that companies will have an opportunity to do some of the things they've never done before.
Now, AI, we're obviously seeing AI being used to enhance the learning industry, and your learning companies are using it where they can to improve their products, improve their content, and the rest of it. But a lot of companies are now scrambling as well to educate their employees on how best to use AI in the workplace, and how to make themselves more effective and the business processes more effective. And that, are you seeing demand for AI related training? Is that something that you're seeing from clients? Are you getting a demand from customers for that? Like, how do I teach our employees about Google's latest AI or Microsoft's latest AI or open AI tools? Are you seeing that demand?
Yes, we are definitely seeing that demand. It started off, ChatGPT, obviously, with the initial onset in 2022. There was a lot of demand for where do you start? How do you use that? It's like, what part of the elephant can you start with here? There was so much. And now there's so many. And, we're seeing starting with, how can I use it? Uh, it's been interesting. A lot of clients have asked for training on overcoming the fear of it because it's that unknown. And so definitely we're seeing that. We designed a lot of different courses. We had honestly just courses just around how to use ChatGPT and how to implement it. It started with a lot of, well, I could use it for my marketing. Now, we're seeing a lot. Okay, how can you use it as a thought leader? How can you use it for enhancing your team? So there's definitely a lot of need, a lot of requests around how to use AI. We're working with companies on helping them to create AI task force. So where are they going to use it in their organization and how should they be using it in their organization and what that looks like. So they're not spending dollars on things that they're not going to see an ROI on, but then also making it easy for their team to put it into place where it'll help them in their efficiencies. Huge, huge opportunities. And again, we're just getting started with it. So it's going so fast. So it's hard to keep up. And I think probably the most important thing is to begin by identifying where within your organization you can use it, how you can train your team, whether it's, operations, your sales team, to be able to make it a part of their system and then to be able to have that ongoing training. So, it fits into everything that we always look at when you're putting together a training program. But the hardest thing now, Dan, I think with AI is there's so much that it's overwhelming. And so it's just a matter of identifying a few key areas to get started with it and then to begin there.
And I think from a regulatory piece, I think we're going to see a lot more requirement for probably not whole AI training specifically for it, but definitely a bolt on to sort of the normal privacy training and data protection training. And if you're handling sensitive information, the risks around AI
Yeah.
and what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing, and really educating employees about that. You know, before we even look at the sort of malicious side of cyber attacks and cybersecurity, just having company documentation or having company information freely pumped into these large language models is going to be an interesting, and the regulations haven't come out about it yet around
Right.
privacy and data protection. And so that's going to be an interesting development to see, and the requirement to start teaching employees about that sort of stuff as well. So yeah, it's exciting. It's an interesting time.
Yeah. And how it ties into your training as well. So how, you can see that side as far as cybersecurity and how AI plays a role in that. And you probably started implementing that in some of your training.
We definitely have, and the demand for it has blown up. There's so much concern. There's so much worry that AI driven cyber attacks, AI driven cyber threats right now are exploding, and the stories are coming out, and it's everywhere. The quality of the scams now, the how convincing a lot of these scams are that are leveraging AI through deep fakes and through perfectly written emails and highly customized scam tactics, because of they're leveraging these large language models and able to search your entire online history and put together the perfect profile to scam you into handing over information, handing over passwords, handing over money. It's becoming, yeah, it's really, really serious. And a lot of companies are taking it very seriously and wanting to train up their employees and educate them properly about how to identify it, how to stop, really trusting everything that they see, because yeah, it's getting serious now. AI is significant. And while the security companies are leveraging AI to be more secure than ever and being able to identify more threats than ever, so are the bad guys doing it. And it's a war against the two. And so, we create the content and sort of help companies educate their employees to avoid that. So
Yeah.
it's a big thing.
And it's not just the employees. You think about, I do a lot in the mortgage space. So if you have an organization that is like a title and escrow company, and they do, I have clients that are in that space. And we had a client end of 2023 who had a huge cyber attack, shut them down literally for, I think, 3 days. And so all of those wires that would typically go through aren't going through. I mean, it costs them an incredible amount of money, but it doesn't just come from internally. It also can come from externally because anyone who's closing on a house that has a loan document, same thing. With AI, these emails, which used to, you could probably identify because of the way it was written. Now it's not. And so they can actually have emails sent to someone who's closing on a house that they think, oh, I'm getting ready to close. I need to send in these documents, because they've been used to sending in these documents, right? So honestly, it's not just about training the staff. It's about training their customers who are going through that process or thinking about going through that process. So I think it expands from internal training to really training externally as well.
I agree 100%, Ginger. We've actually seen in the last 12 months, they've passed a regulation in the UK now where the government was just seeing so many claims, fraud claims by banking customers who were being defrauded by cyber criminals. And the government passed a regulation where they deemed that the banks were not protecting the customers enough. They weren't educating them enough. They weren't protecting them enough. It was getting too easy to
Yeah.
be defrauded through banking transfers and the rest. And they brought in a regulation where if you put in a fraud claim against a bank, the bank that sent your money and the bank that received the money, both of them are basically on the hook for your claim, and it would be settled. And what that has now pushed is those banks now have to start educating their customers.
Mm-hmm.
Forget the employees, that's a given, but they need to start really educating their customers and doing everything they can to reduce their cyber risk, because it's actually going to impact them financially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
Yeah. I think we'll
yeah,
see more of
it's
that.
definitely with talking about sort of the business over time and the industry that you're operating in, Ginger. What would you say has been the most significant challenge in scaling within the learning industry?
I think probably one of the most difficult challenges in scaling is making sure that you're using the right, and it begins with the right LMS, the right learning management system. So, scaling to look at, and I go through this often when I'm, starting with a client, saying, it's not just a matter of where you see yourself now, but where do you see yourself going in the future? And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is to be able to make sure you're making the right choice initially in your learning management system and how that ties in. And I know you obviously are focusing on the cybersecurity. And so a company's looking at how can that, work in with everything else that we're doing. And so that's the other thing, when companies are looking at the other training, compliance training that they're not going to internally do, is to make sure you're working with organizations that can work cohesively with your platform as well. And so, one of the biggest things I hear clients like, I don't want to have 10 different sign-ins for my employees. We want to have, single sign-on. Is that a possibility? So that's one of the things we always look at when we're putting together an entire suite for them, is how easy is it for them to put into their entire ecosystem as far as their learning.
Brilliant. With regards to Go2Training and your product and your content and your service, how do you typically identify adding new features or new content to your service offering? Is that customer demand driven? Is that your team deciding and building that roadmap out based on your research and your knowledge and your experience? Or do you take that sort of customer demand more seriously?
We are more customer demand focused. And so we don't have a standard offering. We do have some courses that come continuing as a request that we can customize, but ours is more consulting. So really meeting with the client, finding out what their needs are, helping them to create that path and design what that looks like and look at their big picture. We don't provide usually just one-off trainings. Ours is more of a, let's put together an entire plan and what that looks like.
A consultative piece. Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
Interesting. And then what would you say maybe over the last 6 months, like what are your clients requesting the most regarding corporate training?
It's interesting. We've seen a shift in a lot of requests for training for leadership, for their leadership team and what that looks like. So we've seen more focus on providing not just the training for their staff, but really helping them to create that cohesiveness, that conversation, within the leaders of their organization and providing training on how to be better leaders, to be better at branding. We're seeing a lot around that cohesive brand and voice and how to bring them together to do that. And that's a different focus. That is something that, most of our clients have been on a regulatory side, training, this is what we need, sales side, this is what we need, some customer centric, training, especially around products and programs. But we have definitely seen a shift in training for their leaders and what that looks like. So we have a client we actually are onboarding in May that we're creating an entire program for all of their leaders that will be based around that.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good insight. Yeah. Very, very interesting. What do you see? Well, where do you currently see the biggest opportunities in corporate training? Where, if you're looking at sort of your go-to-market strategy, your scaling strategy now, where are you looking at the biggest opportunities in corporate training now for yourselves?
Interestingly enough, it's in AI conversations. Yeah. We've had several conversations with AI companies who are at the point, and when you're bringing something to market, and especially as rapidly as these companies are wanting to go to market right now, is being able to identify where they need to provide that training and support, not only for their team, in keeping them up to speed on the changes, not only within the industry, but oftentimes even within their own platform, and providing the training then as they're doing the onboarding of clients and what that looks like. I think there's a huge opportunity in training for the AI companies. And I think the AI companies that get it right are going to be the ones that will go to market and maintain that market leverage faster than AI companies who don't embrace training of their products and programs.
Interesting. Yeah, and those AI companies are blowing up right now. They are
Mm-hmm.
everywhere. It's an exploding industry. So yeah, that's definitely an interesting opportunity to be looking at. Talking about security awareness training or cybersecurity training, how are you currently sourcing your training content for that? Are you seeing a demand for it? Do you have content for it? I mean, with the regulatory piece and companies that you're operating with, is that something that you're hearing demand for?
Well, in the industry we're in, 100% seeing a demand for it. We do not do any content creation around cybersecurity. So Dan, I would look to you. That is definitely one of the things. I think that's probably one of the things that we've learned is we know where our strengths are, and our strengths are in designing platforms, helping to work with companies, SMEs, to where we're enhancing them. We're helping them to create the training. And so if they're looking for a particular training for cybersecurity, we outsource that. As we do, it's like we're looking for SMEs. We cannot be, nor anyone can be a subject matter expert on every topic. And so I recommend to anyone, I mean, if you're not a specialist or don't have someone on staff that's a specialist, outsource it.
Yeah, that's interesting, Ginger, that you say that. What are your thoughts on everyone becoming a subject matter expert now with ChatGPT in these
Oh, that's a slippery slope.
controversial, but
Yeah,
no, I hear you.
I mean, so here's the thing. You can get AI to write anything for you. Doesn't mean you're a subject matter expert on it. And, because we've developed training around a lot of regulations. And as a new regulation comes out, then you have to, do your due diligence on it. And there's areas that you can become very familiar with it, but we still will bring in attorneys or subject matter experts because it's those underlying questions that, I always call it, reading between the lines, because that's the expertise that a subject matter expert has, is how to read what's in between the lines, not just what's in the lines. So yeah, just because you can, prompt ChatGPT to, be able to provide the information doesn't make you a subject matter expert.
Yeah, and being able to present it in a way that is both engaging and relatable that people can actually use that information. That is the key, especially in the regulatory piece and the compliance piece. A lot of the time it's translating a lot of this stuff into how it actually applies to you, what it means in the real world. Yeah, so it is
Right.
interesting.
And how you deliver it, stories, people remember stories. And so even though a regulation may be a certain thing, anybody can read that regulation. But what they'll remember is a story. It's like, oh yeah, I remember. And when they see something. So, and I know you do that in a lot of your training that you provide as well, is providing that information. It's like, it's not just this is what you need to know, but here's an example of how that can work. There was a Bank Secrecy Act that came out that required all companies to do anti-money laundering training. And so it was one of those regulatory compliances, have to check the box, but you want it to be impactful. And the way that we found the most impact in that kind of training was to tell stories and to give examples of that. And so I think that's important when you're looking at designing training, is to make sure that it's not just giving the information of what they need to know, but how it is, how it's been used, how they can relate to it, and something that they can remember. So something they're able to walk away with, and people remember stories.
For sure. Have you seen a trend towards the micro learning, and
Yes.
with people getting their information and their news on TikTok and Instagram these days? And are you seeing more engagement through the shorter learning experiences? And I could imagine that would be very tough in the regulatory and legal and compliance space with so much information to get over. But is that something that you and your team try and work towards?
Yes, 100%. Micro learning is probably one of the most difficult things to do because you do have so much to cover, but you need to be able to deliver training that is bite sized so people can take it as they have the time. And we see that. I mean, TikTok, shorts, all of this has created a very short attention span. But on the other side too, we are seeing, and we see that a lot on YouTube, where people will watch longer videos. And so we are seeing, even 30 to 45-minute videos that people are watching if it's good content. The
Yes.
other thing that's important in creating learning and especially in the micro learning is to make sure it's searchable, because people may be looking for one thing in particular. And so having your learning be not just in the micro segment, but also to have it searchable. So if someone's looking for one particular thing, they go to you as a resource to find it, not to YouTube. And so that's one of the things. I was at a conference several years ago. They had the head of Home Depot, their chief learning officer. He said they spent a ton of money on a learning management system, put all this training in place, and they found that their employees were going to YouTube to look for answers because what they had wasn't searchable. So even though they had, put together this incredible system, they were still finding their employees were going elsewhere for the information. So they adjusted their strategy and started thinking about creating learning that is based around a YouTube or a Netflix model where people can go and search. And then also based on those searches, what is being recommended next. And so those are the kind of things that are important in our learning space and content creation, is to be able to really not just provide the training, but have it to where it relates to that individual and what they're looking for, and keeping it in a place where your staff will go and look at you as the resource for that.
Yeah, that's really interesting insight. Almost your training apps, your learning management systems are leaning towards a design, almost a consumer design, a consumer app design,
Mhm.
like your Instagrams, like your YouTube, moving away from the older style sort of corporate management system, and make it a lot more attractive to the users, so where they feel more at home and more comfortable, because after hours they're spending their time on these consumer apps.
Just in relation to that, we're seeing also, there's apps like School, where it's not just the learning, but it's the community as well. And so we're seeing a lot with that. And again, as a corporation looking at what you're designing, what that looks like, people will also learn from each other. So we're seeing a lot of changes towards creating that community of learning as well.
And the nice thing about the community side of things, whether you see it on YouTube or in a number of different apps, where it really empowers champions within an organization. So those people, people love to be the subject matter experts. And if you create a community and people want to know more information about a certain subject, the organization will have champions that will stand up, and they will be there answering questions and explaining and providing more information. Yeah, the community side is really strong, and definitely I think something learning companies and learning apps need to embrace. That's good. Couple last questions for you, Ginger, before we finish up. If you weren't constrained by budget, you could solve one big problem right now within Go2Training. What would it be and why?
I think probably for our company, one of the biggest challenges is, when we first meet with a client, is to be able to extract from them what their real needs are. And so being able to identify those needs quickly and to be able to offer a solution quickly is always our goal, to be able to do that. But always one of the challenges that we face is to be able to get them where they need to go. And so extracting that information, and especially when you have, multiple people involved with that. So the first thing is finding out what the needs are and then creating that cohesive voice and then implementing the plan.
Yeah, I was about to interject. Finding the right people is normally the start of that solution, and having the right stakeholders in the room, because it can take you a long time to herd them all together, and everyone will have opinions, but getting the right decision makers and those in the room from the beginning is key, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then finally, Ginger, if you could go back and start your journey with Go2Training again, what are some of the things you might do differently?
We were very heavy into technology and thinking we had to create the systems initially. A lot of that was because there weren't systems out there. And so I think probably for us in starting out, I would put less emphasis on creating our own technology and more emphasis on working with finding the right organizations that have that technology in place.
Yeah, interesting. All right. Before we wrap up, can you let listeners know how they can learn more about Go2Training and connect with you online, maybe?
Sure. You can find us at go2training.com. It's the number two training.com. And we provide a comprehensive suite of identifying needs in terms of training and helping you put a plan in place to do that to empower your organization.
Ginger, thank you very much for your insights. It's been really valuable discussion today. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, so this has been Go Fish. Follow us and stay updated with updates and insights from leaders shaping the future of learning and cybersecurity. Thanks very much, everyone.